cabin. Inside, 6-year-old Clara sat on a worn wool rug, her knees pulled to her chest, clutching a chipped ceramic cup filled with lukewarm milk. The fire crackled behind her, doing its best to keep the room warm. But the storm outside howled with such fury that the windows trembled in their frames. Her parents, Tom and Sarah, had stepped out just moments earlier bundled in coats and scarves to check on the animals in the barn before the snowfall buried the entire yard. Just stay by the fire, her mother had told her. We won't be long. Clara had nodded. She was used to being alone in short bursts. Life on the prairie taught children independence early. The logs on the hearth popped. She stared into the flames, tracing dancing shapes with her eyes, until a sound interrupted her thoughts. A soft cry, high-pitched and muffled. Clara frowned and looked toward the door. It wasn't the wind. She knew the wind. This was different. She stood, still barefoot in her little cotton nightgown, and padded quietly across the wooden floor. Another cry, a whimper, more desperate this time, barely audible over the storm's roar. She hesitated, then lifted the heavy wooden latch. The door creaked open, and a gust of frigid air slammed into her chest, stealing her breath. At first, she saw nothing. Just snow, swirling and tumbling in blinding sheets. Then she noticed a small, misshapen bundle lying in the snow, just a few steps from the front porch. Something about it made her heart twist. Clara stepped out into the cold, her teeth instantly chattering. She knelt beside the bundle and saw a tiny face, bluish from the cold, with thin wisps of dark hair and a mouth barely opening to cry. The child, no older than a few weeks, was wrapped in an animal skin, but the covering was soaked and thin. "Oh no," Clara whispered. Her eyes burned. She looked back at the house, then at the tiny baby, then down at the quilt wrapped around her own shoulders, a faded pink patchwork blanket stitched together by her grandmother the year she was born. It was her favorite thing in the world. She never slept without it. But in that moment, she didn't hesitate. Clara unwrapped the blanket from her shoulders and gently swaddled the freezing baby. Her hands trembled from the cold, but she pressed the child close to her chest and carried it back inside, nudging the door shut with her foot. The fire's warmth welcomed them back. She laid the baby on a folded towel in front of the hearth and rubbed its tiny hands, its feet, whispering softly, repeating what her mother always said to her. "You're safe now. You're safe now." She didn't know where the baby had come from. There were no tracks outside, not that she could see, and no calls or shouting from the woods. No one knocking. Just a child, left in the snow, alone. The baby's skin was still cold, but it stopped crying. Its breathing steadied, shallow but even. Clara tucked her quilt tighter around its body, then fetched a second log and fed the fire. She sat down beside the baby and didn't move for a long time. By the time her parents returned, and breathless Clara was still there, her arms cradling the small life she'd rescued from the storm. Sarah gasped and dropped to her knees. "Clara, whose baby is that?" Tom froze in the doorway, blinking at the sight. Where did that come from?" Clara didn't look up. Her voice was small but steady. She was outside, in the snow, crying. Sarah reached for the baby and checked its pulse, her hands moving with practiced urgency. "Tom, get blankets, warm milk, hurry." He didn't question her, he simply moved. Clara finally looked up at her mother. She would have died. Sarah paused, her eyes meeting her daughter's. "Yes," she whispered. She would have. Outside, the storm howled on, but inside that little cabin, a fragile warmth began to grow, one sparked not by the fire, but by a child's quiet act of courage. Taught her how to keep a calf alive through winter and treat frostbitten fingers on stubborn ranch hands. But this was a tiny baby, barely the size of a loaf of bread, lying half frozen on her living room floor, wrapped in her daughter's favorite quilt. She leaned closer, pressing 2 fingers gently to the baby's throat. The pulse was weak, but there, barely. Tom returned with an armful of supplies, blankets, a warm water bottle, and a small tin of goat's milk warmed on the stove. "Is she?" he asked, the question trailing into silence as he crouched beside his wife. "She's alive," Sarah said, "just barely." Clara didn't move. She sat close, her knees pulled to her chest, watching every movement her mother made with wide, unblinking eyes. The quilt she'd given the baby was damp from the snow and clung tightly to the child's small frame. Sarah replaced it gently with a dry flannel cloth, murmuring soothing words as she worked. Tom held the hot water bottle nearby, creating a pocket of heat. They'd need to warm her slowly, or risk shock. "Where did you find her, Clara?" Sarah finally asked, her voice calm but firm. Clara looked down at her hands. She was in the snow, just outside the door. No one knocked. She shook her head. "Just crying." Tom exchanged a look with his wife. Their cabin sat miles from the nearest settlement. There were no wagons or travelers this far out in a storm like this, but their land wasn't empty. Somewhere out there, in the White Hills and woods, lived scattered bands of native people, some friendly, some unknown. Could the baby have come from one of them? Maybe her mother was lost. Tom said aloud, voicing what they were both thinking. Or hurt, or worse. Sarah frowned. But who leaves a baby at someone's door and walks away? They didn't have answers. Only a fragile life lying between them. In a snowstorm that made searching for anyone near impossible. The hours passed slowly. The baby's color began to return. Her fingers uncurled, and her cheeks flushed pink under the firelight. She made a small noise, a whimper, and Sarah smiled. That's a good sign, she said. Clara finally dared to move closer again. Can I hold her? Sarah looked up, surprised. You're not afraid? Clara shook her head. I think she's brave. Tom chuckled softly at that. She's not the only one. With care, Sarah helped her daughter settle the baby in her lap, wrapped in dry cloth now and swaddled in warmth. Clara's face glowed with a kind of wonder, like someone who had just been entrusted with something sacred. She held the baby as though she'd been doing it all her life. What should we call her, for now? Sarah asked. Clara didn't hesitate. Little Snow. It fit, born in a storm, found in the snow, rescued by a child. That night, they all slept. In the main room, near the fire, Tom insisted on keeping the rifle close, just in case. Sarah took the first watch, rocking Little Snow gently while Clara slept beside her, one hand still resting protectively on the baby's wrappings. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Ice glazed the windows. Snow piled high against the cabin walls. But inside, a strange stillness settled, like the air before dawn. The kind that whispered, something important had happened here tonight. Sarah watched her daughter sleep and felt a complicated stir in her chest. Pride, worry, awe. Her little girl had stepped out into the cold and saved a life with nothing but a quilt and a heart full of courage. It wasn't just the baby who had changed that night. Clara had, too. Tom didn't sleep much. He kept rising to check the windows, drawn to some gnawing feeling in his gut. He scanned the tree line for shapes, for shadows, for movement. There was none. But he couldn't shake the thought. Someone out there had lost a child, and someone might be coming back for her. And the storm had finally passed, leaving the prairie covered in a deep white silence. The world outside the cabin looked peaceful, but the night's events hung heavy inside. Tom was the first to rise. He pushed open the cabin door with effort, as snow had piled nearly 2 feet against it. The cold slapped his face, sharp and clean. He stepped out cautiously, rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. The snow stretched untouched, for yards except for one thing. Just beyond the porch, almost obscured by the new layer of snow, were faint impressions. Tom crouched low, brushing the surface carefully. Footprints, barefoot, small, definitely human. They led in from the edge of the woods and stopped right at the porch where Clara had said she found the baby. But what chilled him more was this: there were no footprints going back. Tom stood slowly, a frown tightening his face. Whoever had left the child hadn't returned the way they came, or perhaps they hadn't left at all. He turned toward the tree line again, instinct prickling. Someone had been watching this house. Maybe they still were. Inside the cabin, Clara stirred. Blinking in the morning light, Little Snow slept beside her, swaddled tightly in warm cloth, her face rosy and peaceful. Sarah sat by the fire, spooning porridge into bowls. Tom stepped back inside, brushing snow from his boots. There were tracks, he said quietly, his voice low so as not to wake the baby. One set came right to the porch. No return trail. Sarah's spoon froze midair. So, someone dropped her off. And then, he shook his head. No idea. Could have been watching. Could still be out there. Clara sat up now, fully awake. Do you think they'll come back for her? Tom looked at his daughter, saw the concern already forming in her wide eyes. I don't know, sweet pea. Maybe, but we'll be ready if they do. He didn't say what he was thinking, that if it had been a desperate mother leaving her child, she might not have survived the night. The cold had been merciless. It was a miracle Little Snow had made it, and even more of a miracle that Clara had found her in time. That morning, the family kept to their routines, though there was a strange energy in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. Sarah prepared food for the day. Tom shoveled a path to the barn, and Clara sat quietly, rocking the baby in her arms, humming lullabies she only half remembered. Just before noon, Tom returned from the barn, with a face like stone. There's more. Sarah paused, chopping vegetables. More. What? Footprints. Around the back, larger adult-sized. Clara froze. Tom looked at them both. They're from moccasins' light steps. Skilled tracker. Could be native. Friendly, Sarah asked. He shrugged. Can't say, but they were close. Probably watching us all morning. Sarah's hand tightened on the knife. What do we do? Nothing rash, Tom said. We stay inside, we keep watch. If they want to talk, they'll come forward. Clara, still holding the baby, looked up. But what if they're scared? Tom hesitated. Then we show them we're not a threat. That night, the three of them kept the fire burning bright. Lamps were placed in the windows. Clara insisted on leaving a small folded quilt, her second favorite tone, the porch. In case someone out there is cold, she said. Tom didn't have the heart to say no. The family huddled close that night, the baby sleeping soundly in Clara's arms. But none of the adults slept deeply. Every creak of the wooden floor, every howl of the distant wind kept their nerves sharp. They didn't know it yet, but in the hills beyond their home, hidden among the trees, dark eyes watched through the branches. Silent figures stood like statues, cloaked in furs and snow, eyes fixed on the cabin's glowing windows. The baby was not forgotten, and the tribe had come to see who had taken her in. It passed completely now, but the silence that replaced it was heavier than any wind. Tom rose early again, this time without the rifle. He stepped onto the porch and stood very still. Something was different. No birds, no distant howls, no rustling wind through the pines. Just silence, as though the world itself was waiting. Then he saw it. Across the field, barely visible through the veil of morning fog, stood a figure, motionless, cloaked in fur and shadow. Tom blinked, and another appeared beside the first, then a third. Then, a fourth. He stepped back inside, calmly but quickly. Sarah, Clara, stay inside. Sarah had just been stirring a pot of oats. What is it? They're here. Sarah's face paled. Clara sat up quickly, holding little Snow protectively. How many? Sarah asked, voice taut. Tom looked out again. 5, maybe more. He walked to the mantel and took down the rifle. But he didn't load it. Not yet. Not unless he had to. These weren't the movements of raiders or thieves. These were watchers, deliberate, measured. Sarah opened a drawer and placed a clean towel on the table. Then she began tidying, instinctively, though her hands trembled. Clara stood, unsure what to do. Her gaze drifted toward the baby, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the world waiting outside the walls. Tom stepped back to the door and waited. A knock came, not sharp or hurried, but slow, respectful. 3 times. Then silence. He opened the door. Before him stood an elder man, tall and still as a tree, wrapped in a long buffalo hide coat. His face was marked with deep lines of wisdom and age. Beside him stood a younger woman, her black hair in long braids, eyes wide and tired. She held something in her arms. Another child. Tom nodded once. You're welcome here, he said quietly. The elder returned the nod. We mean no harm. Tom stepped aside, heart pounding. They entered the cabin slowly, cautiously, as if stepping into the den of an animal they could not yet trust. Sarah straightened, setting down the pot. Her eyes went first to the woman's arms, then to the child inside, and then to the bundle in Clara's arms. The young woman gasped, tears brimming. That's your baby, isn't it? Sarah asked, gently. The woman nodded. She knelt before Clara, trembling, and reached out a hand toward the sleeping infant. Clara hesitated for only a second, then looked at her mother. Sarah nodded softly. Clara stepped forward and placed little Snow into the woman's arms. The woman wept quietly, holding the baby close to her chest, whispering something in her native tongue. The baby stirred, then relaxed again, as if nothing had changed. The elder spoke in a low voice. Her name is a pony. She was born early, during the journey from the mountains. Her mother collapsed from fever. We thought the child would not survive. We left her at your door with prayer and hope. Tom looked stunned. You left her to die. The elder met his eyes without shame. No, we left her to live. We knew someone kind lived here. We've seen the child. He gestured to Clara. Leave cornmeal near the stream. Sing to the birds. Show care. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. You were watching us all this time. The elder nodded. Your land touches ours. We keep our distance. Until now. Clara looked at the young mother, who still clutched the baby to her chest, rocking gently, whispering thanks in her native tongue. I gave her my blanket, Clara whispered. The elder turned to her, face unreadable. Then slowly, he bent one knee and bowed his head toward her. You gave her life, he said, and you gave us back hope. Outside the cabin, more figures emerged from the mist. Men, women, and children lined up silently, watching the house. Some carried small bundles. Others held spears tipped down, but all stood in reverent stillness. They had not come to fight, they had come to honor. On the snow-blanketed land, they stood silently, warriors, elders, mothers with babies, swaddled on their backs, all watching, all waiting. Tom was no stranger to fear. He had fought in skirmishes years ago, seen men shoot first and regret second. But this was something different. This was not a war party. It was something older, heavier, a moment held between two worlds, neither willing to break it. Inside, Clara clung to her mother's skirt as the young native woman still cradled her baby, whispering soft words into the child's dark hair. Sarah's voice broke the stillness. Would they like to come in? The elder man shook his head gently. Not all, just the ones who must. He stepped forward and looked directly at Clara. You were the reason they came. They saw what you did not with eyes, but with spirit. Clara blinked. I just gave her my blanket. She was cold. The elder nodded. Exactly. He turned and raised a single hand toward the line of people outside. Without a sound, 4 women stepped forward, each carrying something wrapped in deerskin cloth. They walked through the snow, barefoot, their feet barely making a sound. When they reached the porch, they knelt together and began to unwrap their bundles. Tom, still tense, watched with narrowed eyes, but what they revealed made him lower his rifle in disbelief. Blankets, each one hand-woven, made of buffalo wool, dyed in patterns more intricate than anything Clara had ever seen. Blues and ochre sunbursts and rivers. One of them had tiny feathers stitched into the corners. Another was embroidered with a child's footprints. "These are for her," one woman said, her voice accented but clear. "For the girl who gave warmth." Clara's eyes widened. "You made these?" The woman smiled softly. "With love and time." The elder explained, "Among our people, when someone saves a life with pure heart, we do not repay, we honor. These blankets carry stories. We give them to her, so that our stories will wrap her as she wrapped our child." Clara stepped forward shyly, then looked up at her father. Tom gave her the faintest nod. She walked out onto the porch, boots crunching lightly in the snow, and one by one, the women draped the blankets over her arms. The warmth was immediate, not just from the wool, but from something deeper. She could feel it. Like each stitch carried more than color, it carried meaning. The last woman leaned close. "One day, you will understand what you did." Clara turned and brought the blankets inside, carefully laying them on the hearth as though they were made of gold. Then she walked back out and looked at the young mother still holding the baby. "Can I hold her one last time?" Clara asked softly. Woman hesitated, then nodded. She placed little Snow into Clara's arms, and the child curled instantly against her chest, recognizing the scent, the sound, the safety. "She remembers me," Clara whispered, tears welling up. The woman placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "She always will." Sarah stood in the doorway, her hands clasped. Would you like to eat with us?" The elder turned to her with a small, respectful smile. "No, but we will leave food for you, as you left warmth for us." He motioned to the others, and 2 young men stepped forward, placing several bundles of dried meat, berries, and smoked fish at the edge of the porch. Clara looked around in awe. "Why are you being so kind to us?" The elder knelt before her and pointed to the snowy field. "You see the world as it is. Cold, unfair, often cruel, but instead of looking away, you acted. That is not something taught. That is spirit. That is the blanket between 2 peoples." The girl stared at him. "Blanket between peoples." He nodded. "One small act can be enough to warm a whole valley." The sun was rising now, golden light slipping across the snow. One by one, the tribe began to retreat silently into the woods. The mother, still carrying her baby, was the last to go. She turned at the tree line, looked back, and raised her hand to Clara. The little girl raised her own hand in return. Then they were gone. But their presence remained. So did the warmth. Dawn. But the kind of silence that follows something sacred, the breath the world holds. When hearts are changed, Clara sat on the front step. Still wrapped in one of the handmade blankets the women had draped over her. The sky had turned a soft pink, the sun rising gently above the frost-covered pines. Birds began to chirp, cautiously, as if testing whether it was safe to sing again. Tom stood quietly nearby, arms folded, watching his daughter without saying a word. She had grown overnight, not in inches, but in something far deeper. In understanding. Inside, Sarah was placing the food the tribe had left into the cupboards with care, as if each item were a sacred offering. Smoked salmon, dried chokecherries, pieces of sweetened flatbread, even a small bundle of herbs tied with red string. She couldn't help but smile. These weren't just gifts, they were gestures of trust. Clara looked up. "Pa, do you think I'll ever see her again?" Tom rubbed his jaw, his voice low. "I don't know, but I believe if she remembers the warmth you gave her, she'll find a way." Clara nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "She felt like mine, Pa, like family." Tom sat down beside her, heavy boots crunching the frost. He let the silence stretch for a while, then said, "Sometimes family isn't just blood. Sometimes it's who we choose to care for. And sometimes, who the world puts in our arms for a moment." They sat like that for a long while, until a gust of wind stirred the snow and carried with it a faint sound, the distant rhythm of drums. Far off, coming from the deeper forest. It was too far to see, but not too far to feel. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. "That sound, is it them?" Tom listened carefully. "They're having ceremony. My guess is to honor what happened." Sarah sighed, her eyes shining. "They're honoring her." Clara blinked me. Tom looked at her with something like pride in his weathered face. "You gave more than a blanket, Clara, you gave your heart, and they know that." Later that day, as the sun climbed higher and melted some of the snow on the roof, Clara carried the other gifted blankets to her room. She spread them out on her bed one by one, each with its own unique pattern, symbols she didn't yet understand but felt drawn to. One blanket had what looked like a line of stars stitched across the edge. Another had mountains and rivers, woven so cleverly that they seemed to move with the light. The smallest one had tiny deer and baby birds, their bodies stitched in soft brown thread. Sarah came in and sat on the bed beside her. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Clara nodded. "I want to learn what they all mean." Sarah smiled and brushed Clara's hair back. "Maybe one day we'll find someone who can tell you. I want to go to them. I want to learn their ways, their words." Sarah didn't answer immediately, but her smile held a quiet promise. "Then maybe one day you will." That evening, the family sat together near the fire, warm in the home that had once been so lonely. Tom read from the worn Bible, but his voice caught as Clara rested her head on her mother's shoulder, still holding the smallest of the blankets close. Outside the cabin, the snow glowed under the moonlight, and though the people had gone, their presence still lingered in the warmth of the wool, the taste of the food, in the silence filled with meaning. In one day, the valley had changed, so had Clara. Over the valley, not empty like before, but rich alive with invisible threads. She had always known their land was quiet, but now it felt full of stories waiting to be listened to, not just told. Something had changed in her, and she carried it like the warmth of the blankets she'd once given away. One afternoon, Tom found her kneeling in the snow beneath the pines, tracing patterns in the powder with a stick. "What are you doing out here, little one?" he asked, lifting his hat against the sun. Clara pointed. "I'm practicing their marks, the symbols from the blankets. I'm trying to remember them." Tom knelt beside her. Sure enough, there in the snow were clumsy but heartfelt attempts at tribal-shaped zigzags for rivers, loops for wind, the simple but careful lines of ASUNBURST. Tom watched her for a moment, then sighed. "You've got something in you, Clara. Something mighty rare." She looked up. "Do you think they'll come back?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but if they do, they'll remember you." That night, she dreamt of firelight and drum beats, of the young mother with eyes like calm water, and of the baby's breath soft against her cheek. When she woke up, the dream was gone, but the ache in her chest remained. By now, the blankets had taken a place of honor in the cabin. Sarah hung two on the wall near the hearth, and another was folded neatly at the end of Clara's bed. Whenever neighbors visited, which wasn't often, they'd stop and stare, admiring the artistry without knowing the story behind it. Sarah would just say, "They were given to us in kindness," and leave it at that, but Clara wanted more than silence. One morning, she asked Ma, "Can I write them a letter?" Sarah paused. "A letter? How would we send it?" "I don't know," Clara said. "Maybe we just tie it to a tree. Maybe someone will find it." Sarah smiled faintly. "It's not a bad idea." So Clara sat at the kitchen table with a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper and wrote her heart out. It wasn't fancy, just words a little girl could manage. "To the baby I gave my blanket to. I hope you are warm. I miss you. I hope your mama is okay. Thank you for the blankets. I want to see you again. Love, Clara." From the cabin, Tom helped her wrap the note in wax paper, and together, they walked out to the edge of the woods, where the tribe had once stood in still silence. Clara found the tallest tree and tied her letter to one of its branches. With twine, she stared up at it for a long time, wind tugging at her coat. "You think they'll find it?" she asked. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder. "I think the right eyes will." Over the next few days, Clara returned to the tree again and again. Nothing changed. The note fluttered, untouched, but she didn't lose hope. And then one morning, it was gone. She ran into the cabin, her boots slinging snow behind her. "Ma, Pa, it's not there. The note, it's gone." Tom stood slowly. "The wind?" "No," Clara said firmly. "The string's still tied. Just the paper is gone." Sarah stepped to the window and looked out, her hand gently touching her lips. Then someone took it. That night, they left a lantern burning in the window, and Sarah cooked extra bread just in case. Clara stood at the door with her hands folded, peering into the night. "I don't know if they'll answer," she whispered, "but I feel like they heard me." And far beyond the forest, nestled in a quiet tribal camp under a sky full of stars, a young mother cradled her child near a fire and unfolded a small wax-stiff note. She read it once, then again, and then, with tears in her eyes, she whispered to her baby, "The blanket girl remembers." The cabin, once lonely, now felt like it had grown roots deeper than ever before. Something had shifted. Not just in Clara's small world, but in the land itself. Weeks passed. The letter was gone. No reply came. But still, Clara waited, holding on to hope like a keepsake tucked in her pocket. Then, on a cool April morning, while Tom was tending the fence line and Sarah kneading dough at the window, Clara stepped outside to feed the chickens. That's when she saw them. Footprints. Fresh. Too small for her father. Too soft for boots. Her heart began to race. She ran to the tree line, breath catching, eyes wide, and there they stood, 5 figures emerging from the mist between pine trunks. 2 older women, a young mother, a small boy, and the baby girl. Clara gasped. The mother stepped forward, holding something in her hands. Not a weapon, not food, but a folded bundle, soft, worn, unmistakable. The blanket, Clara's blanket. Except now, it was no longer just hers. It had been cleaned, stitched, and transformed. Around its edges were new patterned sun rays, bird tracks, and a circle of hands, all linked together. The woman knelt and gently placed the bundle at Clara's feet. Clara's eyes filled. She knelt too, touching the fabric, running her fingers over the new stitches. The mother smiled softly, then pointed to her own heart. "Clara," she said, in a careful but clear voice. Clara looked up, stunned. "You know my name." The woman nodded. Then she touched her baby's chest. "Viaka," she said gently. "It means feather." Clara repeated it slowly. Viaka behind her. Tom had stepped out of the barn, and Sarah stood frozen at the doorway, flour on her hands. Tom didn't reach for a rifle this time. He just removed his hat and walked quietly toward them. The older of the two women gestured to the small boy. He came forward, shy, and placed a simple carved figure in Clara's hand. It was a wooden bird, rough but beautiful, feathers marked with delicate grooves. The women didn't speak much, but their smiles said everything. Sarah brought out a small pot of tea, set it on a blanket by the steps, and the group gathered knees to the ground, shoulder to shoulder. No one rushed, no one led. They simply shared the silence, broken only by birdsong and the breeze whispering through pine needles. Clara and the mother, who she learned was named Tona, sat side by side. Clara gave Vijaka a piece of cornbread, which the baby clutched like treasure. After an hour, the group stood again. They had come not for shelter, but for connection, for thanks, for closure. Before they left, Tana reached into a pouch at her side and handed Clara a small necklace, a string of polished seeds, and one tiny silver bead in the center. "For Braveheart," she said softly. Clara nodded, unable to find words. Then, Tana reached into the same pouch and handed Tom a wrapped piece of parchment. It was a message, written in their language, but with careful English below. "The girl who gives without fear brings two nations closer. When the snows return, we will come again." Tom folded it slowly, eyes full of thought. "We'll be ready." That night, as the sky turned golden orange, Clara stood at the window watching the last of the visitors disappear between the trees. Her heart felt full in a way she didn't yet understand. "Pa," she said, do you think one day I could visit them?" Tom looked over. "I think, if you keep living with that same heart, doors will open where you least expect." Clara held the necklace in her hand and whispered the name again. Viaka. That night, wrapped in her newly transformed blanket, she fell asleep dreaming of circles of hands joined, of fires burning gently, of two girls, one white, one native, both wrapped in the same warmth. And from that day forward, whenever someone asked why the old cabin by the pines had tribal carvings on the porch, or why it always smelled faintly of sweetgrass, they'd simply be told, it started with a little girl and a blanket she gave away.